tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So this is the first talk of the Rains Retreat 2025. And this is the beginning of a series of talks, about 10 talks. And the main theme is the Tenfold path. Tenfold path is the Eightfold path plus right knowledge and right liberation. So it basically is a certain theme, but it'll cover a whole range of the Buddhist teachings. You know, the Eightfold path sometimes is reduced to 3 categories: morality, meditation, wisdom. So as you can see, this covers a whole range of the Buddhist themes. Sometimes people they hear certain aspects, you know, like over the course of the year, various Dhamma talks are given, maybe on a specific theme. And sometimes we aren't able to hear the whole range of talks, so we get little bits and pieces of it. So this is an opportunity. Well, not everybody's staying, are they? But it'll be recorded anyway. So, so to hear, you know, the whole range of the Buddhist teachings in a formalized way. And of course, the whole purpose is that you know, from getting the right knowledge, we get right knowledge, right information, we're able to practice in the right way and realize the right knowledge and the right liberation. If we don't get the right information, you know, it's like having a faulty roadmap somewhere. We can do all the effort, we can travel, we can put forth lots of effort and use a lot of our time, and then we end up in the wrong place. So a very, very fundamental aspect of the Buddhist teachings, like the very first factor of the Eightfold Path was right view, having the right view of things. I mean, having the right background, the right attitude, so that, you know, when we begin to practice, it's coming from the right place. And ideally, when we add other factors, like especially meditation and living a very skillful lifestyle, so bear the fruit accordingly. So over this time, it's also within the context of this retreat, the Vasa retreat, and so while this is only 1 hour per week, you know, ideally the rest of the time we're developing meditation exercises, so we can perhaps contemplate some of the themes that we hear about on the Dhamma discussion day, the Sutta discussion days. So first of all, to give some background, you know, there's usually, I would say, maybe 5 ways we learn about the Buddhist teachings, 5 different, you know, sources, if you like, of the Buddhist teachings. And level of authority, we have, first of all, the Buddhist scriptures, and then there is the commentaries on those scriptures. Then you can say there's the sub-commentaries. Then there is the word, the teachings of, you could say, wise or ideally enlightened masters. And then the last one, I could say, is probably something like the culture, the tradition, maybe even hearsay sometimes. What we pick up from various people, what we see maybe as popular Buddhism, how it's practiced in a Buddhist country. And nowadays we even get some kind of, you know, secondhand accounts from people who had experiences sometimes. But, you know, as far as the accessibility goes, usually it's from the bottom to the top, you see. People hear about something about the Buddhist teachings, they hear a few comments, or they see something, they go to a Buddhist country, and then maybe if they are fortunate, they have access to a teacher, or they have able to receive some kind of information or teachings from somebody. And then less accessible are the sub-commentaries, because some of these are in the native language. For example, there's a a commentary on the monks' Vinaya rules, which was written by one of the Thai princes at the end of the 1800s. The Vinaya Mukha, it's called. And of course, well, now it's translated into English, though, but previously it was only in Thai. And then there is the commentaries, which is very, very inaccessible to most people because it's in Pali language. And I think almost very, very little of it has actually been Romanized, put in Roman script. Most of it's in one of the Asian scripts. And then we come to the Pali Canon. You see in the sign there. This is the kind of authority, the highest authority of the Buddhist teachings. It's said to come from the Buddha himself, the word of the Buddha. That's the tradition, and it was preserved. It's the canon means the body of scripture, and the Pali means that it's been preserved in the Pali language. Up until about 100 years ago, it was only accessible to Pali scholars. Only Pali scholars could read it, and only about 100 years ago it was Romanized, but in Romanized text. Before that, it was in Indian text or Sri Lankan or Burmese or Thai script even. So only scholars could read it. And there were some scholarly monks in Asian countries, especially Sri Lanka, who were also speak English. They could read the Pali in their own Sinhala script, and then they could explain it in English. And that was around the late 1800s, early 1900s. So, and it was in Sri Lanka and Burma, mostly Sri Lanka, and they could explain it. They wrote some books about Buddhist teachings. Yeah, but before that, it was inaccessible. I think it's only been 50 years or so that the Pali Canon has been translated into Thai language. You can say it's the spoken Thai language, but it's very, very well-educated Thai language. It's like Bangkok language or something. So only quite educated people could read it. It wasn't in the local dialect, you see. Because it is the sacred language. It is the word of the Buddha, so you couldn't speak, it was improper to speak about the Buddhist teachings in, your everyday kind of village language. So the same as the Bible. Most of the Bible is it was St. James Version or something from King James, not Saint. King James Version was what, 1500, 1600 it was written. So it's in thou and thys, thou and thy and whatnot. It was King James, Jacobean language or something, or but because it was the word of a holy master, Jesus, then it had to be a certain very, very high very respectful language, very appropriate language. So the same with the Pali language. Now we're within the last, say, even 20 years, we've had access to excellent translations in English of the Pali Canon, almost all of it. Which is quite a feat actually, because the Pali Canon I read somewhere, it's 20 times the size of the Bible. There's something like I think about 40 volumes of books to make up the whole Pali Canon there. Yeah. And virtually all of it has been translated now to English. Not that anybody's read it, but but the Pali Canon now is accessible to us, so we're very fortunate to be able to access it, to access the highest authority of the Buddhist teachings now. Rather than receiving it second, third, fourth hand, we can actually read. They say this is the word of the Buddha. This is what the Buddha was saying 2,500 years ago. There's a few little complications, though. One is that, because it is the the sacred language, it is it is it is put in a certain style, which some people find quite difficult, and it is what we call narrative style. That is, that it is just a series of a collection of the Buddha's teachings. The Buddha gave at various times to various people in different themes. So the way it's been tried, it's been kept put together, it's been formalized. There's various ways it's been done. If you see in the what's called the the Sutta Pitaka, there's three baskets, three pitakas they call them, three main volumes, main parts to it. There is a Vinaya, the Vinaya Pitaka. That's mainly the monastic rules for the monks and the nuns. Then there is the Sutta Pitaka. Sutta Pitaka is these preserved teachings of the Buddha. And then there is the Abhidhamma Pitaka. The Abhidhamma is much recognized to be much later than the time of the Buddha. It's like it's now formalized teachings. They put together many of these Buddhist teachings in different ways. There's a whole section on the various conditions called the patana, the conditioned causality. Yeah. And then there's other categories of them, 7 different categories in the Abhidhamma. But the Buddha, most of the Buddhist teachings are maintained in the Vinaya Pitaka and Sutta Pitaka. And the Buddha was teaching for 45 years. So imagine giving a talk every day for 45 years. Huh? That's a lot of video. Maybe even sometimes, maybe more than once a day. He would maybe meet some monks in the morning and talk to them, and then have a meeting in the afternoon and talk to them, and he would give a desana in the evening, talk to them too, to the group in the evening. Anyway, fortunately, there was one of the monks who was a Buddha's attendant, and he had a very, very retentive memory. He remembered all these teachings. They were Ananda. And he was a Buddha's attendant, so he was with the Buddha most of the time when the Buddha gave these teachings, so he could remember them. In those days, all the teaching was done orally. There were no books around. So, the teachings were given orally, and then if people wanted to remember them, they had to listen very carefully to remember what was said. So this oral tradition also has a certain style to it, as you can imagine. There's a lot of repetition. If you just hear it once, maybe you forget. So a good teacher would repeat, certain themes again and again. And then for the sake of memorizing, some of these standard teachings became quite formula, became very formalized, you see. So when the Buddha talked about suffering, for example, as you do, I think in the morning chanting, Jati piduka, jara piduka, maranam piduka, old age is jati, birth is suffering, old age is suffering, death is suffering, became a very, very fixed formula. So that when somebody was trying to remember what the Buddha said, talked of suffering, okay, jati piduka, jara piduka, we'll just go repeating in their mind, you see, because it was a very, very common theme, repeated again and again and again. For people who, like us in modern day and age, who have books, we grew up reading books, we didn't have to do that, did we? Just turn back 2 pages. What did he say again? It's in the book behind, a few pages ahead of us. We already finished it, or behind us. Yeah. But when it was done orally, it had to be repeated again and again before it sunk into people's mind. I remember listening to Ajahn Chah, and over one rains retreat, and most of his teachings they were sort of repetitive in a way. He would have a certain theme he would expand upon. Maybe next time he'd pick up the theme again, repeat some of it, and then develop it a bit more. And then remember many times hearing about, as we often do, about suffering, about suffering. And then one time I was listening to his talk, and I just, I kind of relaxed a bit because I had to translate from Thai to English. So my left brain was mostly working, trying to figure out what he was saying. But then, okay, suffering, right, okay, I can relax now. I know I've heard this before, And then suddenly it just hit me. Oh, suffering. That's what he means. Suddenly had a totally different context. Oh, right. Everything is suffering. It means it can be hard to put it in maybe in English as suffering because there's a wider context to it. It's more like everything is imperfect. There's imperfection. It's not necessarily painful. Like one time Ajahn Chah said, he said, suffering is suffering. But happiness is suffering too, he said. What? Aha. Happiness is suffering? You get that? Because it's impermanent. Yes. So logically, by using my left brain, it didn't quite work, did it? Suffering is suffering. I got that. But happiness is suffering? No. Left brain doesn't work. But when your right brain is open and you can, you get more expansive, can see the bigger picture. Oh, yes. Even happiness is suffering because it's impermanent. So you get disappointed. You get really excited about happiness. Oh, yes, wonderful, great, feels great. And then it fades away, and then disappointment. Oh. So we have the knowledge, but the real point is the direct experience. These are just words leading to an experience, ideally, guiding us in the correct way, hopefully. So like reflecting upon particular themes, very skillful. There's certain themes that aren't so helpful to reflect upon. Is the world infinite or not infinite? Buddha said it's a waste of effort. You never figure that out. That's a wasting your mental energy. But contemplate the nature of suffering, the arising of suffering, pass away of suffering. That's a theme worth contemplating and reflecting upon. So anyway, when we have the access now to the Buddhist teachings, and there is always some discussion about whether this is really authentic Buddhist teachings, you see. But there's been a number of scholars who have studied the Pali texts very, very thoroughly, and they said there's enough evidence there to indicate that at least a very large percentage of it is from the Buddha himself. It's all put in the forms that the monk who remembered it, he would say, oh, this have I heard. The Buddha said this. He was saying at this place, and this person came along and asked him this question, and the Buddha responded this way. And fortunately, at the end of it, most of the people have a happy ending. when they heard this Buddhist teachings, they rejoiced in it, and then they said, oh, and then they were enlightened. But I've come to the end of a lot of those teachings, and I haven't quite got to the happy ending yet. but at least it was clear anyway. Not enlightened. Enlightened with a small e, maybe. better understanding anyway, if not enlightenment. But you can imagine, as I said, the Buddha was teaching for 45 years, so there's a lot of material there. So, the kind of complication is, how do we even start? How do we access it? Because, as I said, the Buddha was teaching different people at different times about different themes. And in the very beginning of the Buddhist teachings, the very first discourses he gave were to already, most of them were experienced meditators, for example. His very first discourse he gave to his five friends who were meditating with him for many years. Maybe 6 years or so, they're meditating with him. They did all these austerities together, so they were very, very very well-established meditators and very moral people, keeping the precepts, living a very ascetic life. So when the Buddha taught them, he just gave them a very, very short teaching. You can say they had sila, had morality, they had meditation, but they didn't have the right wisdom yet. So the Buddha just gave them a few teachings and they were enlightened. It was the first 5 disciples, what they call the Panchavaki. And then he met other disciples, other practitioners. There's a whole group of them, 1,000 of them, who belonged to another sect. They were the matted-haired ascetics, who were worshipping fire. And again, they were very evolved spiritually. They had many years practicing morality. They did meditation practice, although their meditation was fire, worshipping fire. But fire worshipping can be a source of concentration exercises. So they just needed a short teaching also before they were also enlightened. But other people, they were, the Buddha was, he wasn't exclusive in his way of teaching. Like in the tradition, in the native tradition in India at that time, Brahmanism, which is the basis of Hinduism, the teaching was only given to chosen disciples who were Brahmins of a certain caste, you see. So the average person couldn't hear the teachings. But the Buddha, he belonged to another group. They were called the mendicants, the wandering mendicants. And they gave teachings out in the parks. Near the towns, there was a park with some kind of parkland or maybe a bit of forest where usually the kings or the wealthy people of the town would sponsor this area for these religious wanderers to come and discuss their various teachings. They're open to anybody could come there. There's one story where, he was a leper, and the lepers in India, of course, were shunned. They're outcasts from society. But he saw this gathering of people in the park. He thought, I think I'll go over there and maybe there's some food being offered. The beggar, the leper, he couldn't hold a job, so he had to rely upon begging for alms, you see. So he just thought, I think I'll go over there and maybe there's some food being given there. Lots of people are gathered there. So he wandered over to it and he said, no food here. It's this ascetic Gautama giving a lecture, he said. There's the Buddha giving this teaching in the park, you see. So he said, well, I'm here anyway. I'll just sit down and listen, he said. So he sat down and listened to it. And he got enlightened. Which was a very rare event because he wasn't even intending to listen. Maybe he was still hungry too. So how can you listen to a teaching when you're hungry, huh? When your stomach is rumbling louder than the teaching. But anyway, but the Buddha saw that he had all the ripe conditions, even though he would never have access to any kind of teaching, religious teaching, in most religions, would he? Wouldn't be allowed into a place of worship, because he's a leper, People would shun him, So the Buddha would give these, some of these, the talks he gave were out in the public, in the parks. He would settle in where's a park in Sydney? I was like, Hyde Park. I was gonna, really? Oh, that's London, isn't it? There's one in London too. I was gonna say Hyde Park in London. That's where the people go, don't they? In Hyde Park in London, they stand up on the soapbox and give. Oh, okay. I don't know if the Buddha could do that or not. But he could sit in a corner and just chat with people. I think he wouldn't stand on the corner on soapbox and give a lecture. Anyway, so the Buddha was giving these talks in public. So most of the people there were not, Buddhists, so to speak. They were always the spiritual inquirers, an interest that listened to him. So of course he had to give more of a general teaching, start off with morality. And for some of the lay people, his talk began with generosity, morality, and then he talked about the benefit of kamma, before he talked about meditation. Now, in the evening, when the Buddha is staying in a monastic environment, there was outside the towns too. Most of the towns were walled towns, you see. So when it became dark, they closed the walls for travelers, and only the brigands, the bandits, and the monks stayed outside. The homeless wanderers could live out in the forest, you see. So the Buddha he'd be living out there, these places. Some of them in the early days, there was no Buddhist monasteries even. The monks didn't have any monasteries. They just lived in the forest, you see. So the Buddha would be out there with his, maybe his attendant and a few other monks, camping out under the trees. Then some monks might gather and say, oh, Venerable, you're a senior monk, you're a senior teacher, can you give us a talk? So you might give a little talk to the monks in the evening. Venerable Ananda was there to listen to it, and most of the time it'd be a little bit more, more specialized about different aspects of meditation practice, for example, or certain aspects of right view or something about karma and rebirth and things like this. So he gave more specialized teaching there. Later, when the Buddha became more well-known and his teaching became more accepted by richer people and the kings around in the neighborhood, then they gave him some land. The first one was the king of Magadha, Bimbisara. He was very, very impressed by the Buddhist teachings, first by just his deportment. Saw the Buddha walking in the morning, walking almost in the morning, and just seeing him with, he wasn't scrambling for food, just walking very, very mindfully. How about that? Walking mindfully, that's what he was doing. That was his special emphasis in meditation, was mindfulness. So Buddha was walking very, very mindfully, and then the king saw him and thought, this monk looks impressive, Invite him to come and give me some teachings. So the Buddha gave him some teachings, and he was very, very inspired, and he became a disciple. He said, I'll give you this certain forest I own called the Bamboo Grove. I think it was in Rajagaha, Welawana, the Bamboo Grove. It was the first place. And in the Buddhist tradition, in the very early days, the monks were totally, they had no possessions at all. They didn't own anything. So when the king offered them the Buddha this property, he thought, wait a minute. Should I accept that, because, then the monks have property, then, all kinds of complications come. But they thought, the Buddha must recognize the value of that. First of all, it was outside the town, accessible to people to come. And the monks could be supported there well enough. Didn't get involved with all the, social life and politics of the town. So the Buddha said, okay, yes, we'll accept this property then, as a place where the Buddhists could congregate. And the Buddha recognized the importance of the Sangha, the community, the community of like-minded individuals, because there were so many different sects around at the Buddha's time. There were so many different views and opinions and different ways of practice. There were the naked ascetics, and then there were the Matahari ascetics, and there's all kinds of, even today in India, right? If you go to India, there's all kinds of different holy men around, with different practices, different ways they dress, and different practices they follow. Some are strict vegetarians, and then the Buddhists, over time, the Buddhist community began to have their own particular unique way of living, you see. The Buddha designated this type of robe, for example. We shouldn't go naked in public. We have a certain kind of robe. And then because of I guess at first it was just a piece of cloth to cover the body. But then sometimes it got stolen. So then the Buddha said, okay, we'll collect this cloth from what's thrown away, the discarded cloth, and when you sew it into the rice fields pattern of the rice fields of Magadha. There's a rice field pattern here. Fortunately, I've been to Asia and saw rice fields, so I know what the pattern is. There's a paddy, and then there's a little walkway around it. They have to dam the rice paddy to keep the water in, you see. So this became a little dike around it. So these small squares, well, some of them were quite big actually, but in Bali, very small. You say, yes, on the hillsides, a very small pattern with a dike around it, you see. So that's what this robe now has that pattern in it. A bit formalized. We have to have, 7 or 9 panels, main panels. Then we got a little rim around the bottom, you see. But then it was recognized. If somebody stole this robe, somebody else would say, aha, that comes from a Buddhist monk. I recognize it. Because of the rice fields of Magadha pattern. Nowadays, it doesn't happen. We don't get any robes stolen usually. Not recently, anyway. Not only is the pattern recognizable, but the color is too. And then the monks were living in remote places, so it was very hard to store food. So eventually, Buddha made these regulations. We just collect our food and eat food between dawn and midday, just in the morning. In the early days, monks would go almost around in the evening. And one of the monks was going for collecting alms food at night in the dark, and somebody saw him in his robe and thought it was a ghost, and they got frightened. So the Buddha said, it's not a good idea to go around wandering for food at night, you say. So only up till midday. So gradually the Buddhist monks developed a certain specific lifestyle particular to them. So more or less we have to live together and separate from other groups. Although in the beginning it wasn't the original idea, but gradually we have a particular way of eating out of the bowl and things. So it's even today in Thailand, there's still various you can say ways that these monastic rules were practiced. For example, like eating out of the bowl is what the Buddha said was an ascetic practice. So only some of the strict forest monasteries maintain the practice of eating out of the bowl. Most of the monasteries in Thailand, the monks eat out of off plates, right? Yeah. Which is, you keep your food separate and you taste one on the other, taste them different ones, but put it all in the same bowl. You aren't upset, are you? Do we? We put all your nicely neat cooked food in one bowl. You aren't upset? Okay. We still get to taste it, If, you probably don't notice, you don't look in our bowl, do you? Yeah, oh. Yeah. Well, there's a little bit of a trick to it, Yeah, you put around the edges, you see, like this, so the curry's here and the salad over there and the sweets over here, you see. So, yeah. So, although some monks, they had a practice where they put the food in the bowl and they mix it all up, you see. Yeah, it was one of his practices at one time, yes, yeah. But when I was there at Wat Pah Pong the very first day, I was there as a novice. No, I was a monk already. And that was the first time we went to the Isan, the northeast, so I didn't know how they ate there, you see. But they have a special way of eating, the monks. You go almost around, you get the sticky rice, and they put it in a big bowl like this. And this novice this monk who was showing me, he put on this huge ball like this, almost like a football, I'm not going to eat that much, and they stick it in the middle of the bowl, and then when they put the food in, they're on the edges, you see. Then they take a little bit of rice off the top, off the ball, and then they just dip it into the food on the side, you see. But then just at the very end, the monk comes down with a chili sauce right on top. So everything gets covered in chili sauce. Anyway, we have to. That was their way of eating, anyway. But, because in the Northeast they have lots of sticky rice. You see, they use their hands. Take a bit of sticky rice and then you just dip it in the other curries. You see, they mostly eat the rice. You see. But over the years, the and that's why the monks Vinaya, for example, was established. And first of all, there were no rules. There were no particular rules to follow. It was just the general rules of the religious seekers in the Buddhist time. You lived in the forest and shaved the head. In the Buddhist part of it, they shaved their head, shaved the hair off, renouncing the world, had a certain kind of robe on or something, and collected their food. But then, gradually, as the monks met lay people who they were dependent upon for alms food, there's comments. The monks shouldn't do this. The monks are doing that. So the Buddha had to make these regulations finally. Until in the end, apparently when the Buddha was passing away, we had an accumulation of 227 rules. They weren't all the same degree of seriousness or the same degree of practice. There's only maybe 50 we have to know about to follow. That's even the most of them, concerning robes and the food and the way of living, etc. So eventually but then a lot of them were in the later parts. A lot of the rules have to deal with living with other monks, how to look after your lodging, how to take care of the particular possessions in the monastery, and how to deal with difficult monks, or how to solve disputes and things. So eventually, what did it say? 4 volumes of rules began to be collected. They aren't all just rules, though, because there's also explanations. This was in the context of India in the 6th century BC. So there were, certain ways of living in the Buddhist time that we don't practice today. There's one kind of robe, for example, they used in the Buddhist time that today we don't even have any idea what it is, what kind of robe it is. We just don't know what it is, so we just forget about it. But there's about 10 rules in the monks' rules about concerning this one particular robe. Somebody said it was a cloth which was glued together. These cloths are woven, you see, but this kind of cloth was glued. Just some hair put down and then some kind of glue put on it. So it was much thicker for sitting on and maybe for a blanket or something or other, but nobody knows now, so we just forget about it. So, and then we come to the Sutta Pitaka, so teachings of the Buddha. Like I said, there were so many of them that we had to, somebody tried to, put them in some kind of order. So eventually there was 5 basic books of the Sutta Pitaka. The first one is called the Digha Nikaya. Digha means long, the long length discourses. These are pages and pages in translation. And then they cover a whole range of different events. There's something about how the world began, the different ways, the coming together of the universe and the passing away of the universe. There's some are just are kind of repetitions of basic teachings. There's some which are, one is the story of the passing away of the Buddha, which was lasted for maybe about 3 months. The story of the Buddha saying he's going to pass away, and he went here and went there and gave this talk and went to this place and that place and this happened, that happened. The The second one is the middle-length sayings in 3 volumes. Most of them they're middle lengths, but they are, you can say, they're Dhammadesana, they're teachings, formal teachings. Usually maybe something like we'd give here on a Saturday evening, maybe 40-minute talk or something, covering a whole range of themes again. Everything from, he's talking to some of the monks about the things you should give up. You shouldn't get angry, you shouldn't feel grudge, you shouldn't do this and shouldn't do that. And other ones are about meditation practice, a discourse on mindfulness. The 4 foundations of mindfulness is in the middle-length sayings. It's also in the long discourses too, but there were some really profound ones, profound teachings, but they're all, they aren't listed in those 2. They are just given as, as long or middle length. But in the third one, the second one, the Samyutta Nikaya, they're listed by theme. So there's a whole bunch of discourses on practicing mindfulness, on the 5 powers, on the 5 groups of grasping. The next one, the Anguttara Nikaya, is based on number. The 1 this, the 2 that, the 3 that. I know some people, they like numbers, right? I'm a number person. I studied engineering, so I like numbers, And some people could remember that easily. It's one of the ways that you can remember, is there's several ways. One is by number. One is by theme. If you have a certain kind of catchy theme, Jati Piduka, Jara Piduka, So advertisers know this, don't they? So they have some kind of little pithy song or something or other, short little tune to go with it, So you remember that when you go into the shopping mall, you see. For others, when I go to a shopping mall, which is very rarely, but if I do there, I look at the number of the price, you see. What's the cheapest? And then the last one, the Khuddaka Nikaya, it's kind of like a miscellaneous section. There's 15 different books in there. Some of them are the most popular ones of Buddhism, like Dhammapada. Dhammapada is a collection of very short sayings, like 4 lines. And some of the most best remembered and probably profoundest teachings are in that one. One is that the mind is the forerunner of all things. The mind is chief, and mind made our things. Or we are the owners of our own karma. We create our own karma. Then there is, most of them, quite a few of them are verses, in verse form. The Tera and Teri Gata. Gata means a verse. Those are the verses of the enlightened monks and nuns. You can, when some of the monks and nuns were enlightened, of course, they gave this poem of joy, partly what was instrumental in their awakening, and partly, I guess you could just say, a praise of the Buddha. A lot of it is praise for the Buddha, his teachings, and how it really helped them to see the truth and things. And there's a whole bunch of other ones which are not so well known. There's stories of the ghosts and stories of the petas, the hungry ghosts and things. I haven't looked at them very, very serious detail. Then there's the Jataka stories. The Jataka stories are a little bit, some of it might be folklore, because this is a 450 previous births of the Buddha stories. When the Buddha was born as a monkey, and the Buddha was born as a prince, and there's all these different stories, and some of them might be like Aesop's fables, maybe, more like a kind of generic folklore, maybe, and then they put the Buddha's name in it, maybe, Anyway, the most of the teachings are available in the Sutta Pitaka. Most of the relevant teachings. And then sometime in the Vinaya, for example, the Mahavagga, the first section of the Vinaya, that gives the account of the Buddha's life after he was enlightened. After he was awakened, then he went to Isipatana, where he met the first 5 disciples and gave the first teachings. And in the Majjhima Nikaya, the middle length sayings, there is stories of before the Buddha was enlightened. All the asceticism he practiced, all the hardships he went through, and all the privations he went through before he was enlightened. And then the stories of the Buddha's enlightenment. There's several different renditions of when the Buddha was enlightened. They're in the Samyutta Nikaya. So, like I say, it is sort of what we call narrative style. We just hear, the Buddha. Somebody asked the Buddha about his enlightenment, one evening, and he gave a little talk about it. That was collected in the middle length sayings. But the other form is called normative. That means it's systematically laid down. The Buddha did this and did that, and taught this and taught that, and it's in a very systematic style, which most of us are used to, aren't we? You pick up a book on Buddhism, you want to start off with A, B, C, D, right? We're down to get the step by step, the Eightfold Path stages. But the Pali Canon is in this narrative style, so unless you have a guide, you have to kind of wander around through it. So when I explain about this theme, for example, then I will choose various discourses, teachings from the Pali Canon that we can look at, you can read, and over the years there has been various, different teachers have tried to have some kind of format to it. So we start off with the beginning of the Eightfold Path, for example, right view, and then there is one discourse in the middle length sayings there, Majjhima Nikaya, about right view. But if you didn't know that, you'd be hard pressed to find it, maybe, unless you're very familiar with reading all of these scriptures. But there's a lot of reading there. Somebody said it was 20,000 pages, for the whole thing. But how much time you got? But in that, too, there is also a lot of repetition. A lot of it is repeated again and again. Like I say, it's a way of people to remember the main themes, the Eightfold Path repeated many different times. Sometimes it's just repeated once, mentioned. Other times it's explained. Sometimes parts of it are explained in great detail, like the discourse on right mindfulness, for example. Explained in great detail, fortunately. So over this time, we give it an opportunity to explore these various themes, and at the same time be able to hopefully get some knowledge of the Pali Canon, because there's a lot of material in there. I think nobody will be able to cover all of it, maybe in their lifetime even. But on the other hand, if you just know the key points to it, like the Tenfold Path, the Tenfold Path, then the very, very last step is liberation. That's all you need to know. Okay? But stay tuned. Stay tuned till I get to the last talk, huh? Okay. Okay.